Very warm welcome to NIBA's webinar on farming the future. This is a joint venture we do in partnership with our friends and partners at Allianz. I'll talk about that in a moment. But one of the things coming up in next week's magazine, the NIBA magazine, which will be out on the streets fairly shortly, is a guide around farming the future. This is a forward look on what's happening on the land, what are some of the impacts and insights, particularly with a risk and broking perspective. But it's got a few other dimensions to it as well, around well-being, around succession, and we hope over the next hour to unpack some of those conversations. Joining us for this discussion, if we head to the next slide, are an all-star cast. NIBA's Broker of the Year and Practice Leader for Agri-Risk at Gallagher's, Caleb Richards. Tom Gilmore, who's Head of Farm Underwriting at Allianz. And delighted to be joined also by Kylie Lehman, who's on the tools and on the ground with McLarty McShane as a broker in regional Victoria. I'm not going to introduce them more than that because I did want them to introduce themselves and to perhaps give us all a bit of a lens on their world. I did want to acknowledge the work that we do with Allianz. We put out 2 to 3 broker guides a year. It is part of the magazine. Today is a first. It's the first time we've taken a broker guide and looking to bring it to life through the voice of the panel today. So if it works and you enjoy it, really interested in your feedback about how we can do this more and better. I think it's a pretty fascinating and super important topic. So big shout out to Allianz in that regard. And just an acknowledgement to Virat Nero, who sits on the NIBA team as our head of comms. It was his initiative and his thought that said, hey, why don't we try something different for 2026 and bring this to life? So hats off to you, Virat. Folks, this is the agenda for today. This is the stuff we do want to talk about. We do want to set the scene. We do want to talk about navigating the top farming risks. We do want to talk about how AI in farming is changing the game. We do want to talk about resilience, and there's a well-being overlay there. And we do want to talk about the broker as a farm risk advisor. That kind of sits really neatly with other research NIBA has been doing about the broker as the strategic risk advisor, sitting in alongside business owners and key leadership teams, helping to navigate, translate, and understand. No more important than on farm. And of course, like any webinar, we absolutely would love engagement, questions. You'll see on your button a Q&A button. So please feel free to have a chat, ask any questions that you'd like. We will have a couple of poll questions as well. That'll help guide the conversation. They'll come in through in just a moment. But if we unshare screen and say big welcome to our panel, and I'm going to start with you, Caleb. Tell us a bit about you, what your background is, and what's your view on farming of the future.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. My background, agri, I guess work has always been at the centre of my life. Grew up in the Snowy Mountains on an apple orchard, so I was very privileged to have that. Grew up in what I refer to as God's country, beautiful part of the world west of Batlow. So it's always been very centric to who I am and how we operated as a family unit. That's then transferred later in life into when I found myself in the insurance world. It's continued to be, I guess, at the forefront of what I do, what I'm passionate about supporting in the sector, having first-hand experience in the ups and downs, that comes with that. So, very passionate about it, and keen to share some insights today.
Caleb, you're Broker of the Year. You were it was gala dinner last conference. How's that been for you, particularly in the context of this conversation? How's it helped in that regard?
Yeah, it's been really good to see it. I guess up in lights as far as everyone's paying attention to agriculture at the moment, whether that's because of ag tech or whether it's because of the global economies all doing what they're doing currently. But I think everyone's reminded where their food comes from. And so I know that's always been a big initiative for Allianz, who I've worked with for a lot of years on this. And so, yeah, look, personally, it's been very topical, more topical than I've ever sort of known before. And perhaps that's a little bit to do with the NIBA reach and that bit of exposure that's come with hitting some, I guess, new networks that I haven't probably previously engaged with.
Fantastic. Well, welcome, Caleb. We're looking forward to chatting further with you. Kylie, welcome. I think it's your first webinar ever. So thank you for joining and tell us your story.
So I grew up on a Mallee farm, which is mainly cereal and sheep. So both parents, third generation farmers, married a third generation farmer, and our daughter married a third generation farmer. So the wheat, barley and sheep thing is mainly what we talk about at home as well. So, and then I found myself in insurance about 20 years ago, and I take a big interest in the Mallee Wimmera area, with being that I've still got family down there. So mainly crop and wheat farmers for me. So I do a lot of travelling, visiting them, just helping them through any hassles that they have as far as insurance goes.
And Kylie, just for people who don't know, just tell us where is the Mallee exactly? Where's it bounded by?
Yeah. So my hometown is Birchip, which is halfway between Mildura and Ballarat. I'm based in Mildura now, but we still travel, the whole team travel at least up to 300 kilometres at the moment to visit clients. So, but yeah, Mallee is very, very flat land and a lot of sheep, which is huge money at the moment. So, they seem to be getting bigger and bigger.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kylie. And Tom, over to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Richard. So unlike Kylie and Caleb, I didn't actually grow up on a farm, and I actually felt like a bit of a pretender the first time I bought a pair of RMs. But I learned kind of farming and insurance with elders in my first gig out of uni. And week one was kind of sent out for a renewal discussion with a client. So I spent about 5 or 6 years down around the Canberra-Goulburn region before moving to Sydney. And I've now been with Allianz about 7 years across a range of different roles, but all of them with a kind of regional kind of focus to them. Initially joining as part of our farm team here, then doing a variety of distribution roles, and now as the head of farm underwriting here for the last 12, 18 months or so. So most of my working career has been spent focused on agri.
Yeah, and you spend a fair bit of time in the bush, yeah?
I used to spend a little bit more time than I do now. I spend a bit more time in an office now, speaking with people in the bush. But yeah, it's where I got a love for kind of the agri sector, was actually going out and speaking with farmers, great people, very honest. So it's always been a bit of a soft spot for me.
Hey, so Tom, that's a great segue. I might just go back to Caleb to start with, and perhaps first question for everyone is, give us a temperature check. What's the situation with agri risk on farms now, and how's that changed over the last 10 or 15 years, Caleb?
Yeah, Richard, it obviously evolves quite rapidly. It's just such a reactive sector by virtue of the weather, as you know, you decided to bring it at the start of the call, and that's just what it is. It is a very reactive sector. As a result, farmers are just, I've referred to them before, it's just been stoic, because you have to be. You don't know if you're going to have, it's not about customers walking into your shop. It's about whether or not you get, the rain at just the right time to be able to plant, to be able to water and feed your livestock and therefore your livelihood. So I think from an insurance point of view, I think the sector's changed. If you go back sort of 50 years or so, their purchasing decision has been commoditized. So they really thought of insurance in the same vein as just about every other commodity that they've purchased. And that was, if things were good, we didn't care what we had to buy. If things are bad, we put a line through as much as we can and, try to save the cost. And that's, by virtue of, I guess, the direct agents. And it's interesting, Tom mentioned, elders, and so that's probably how the landscape has been if you looked at the last 50 years, and it's been direct agent style selling as opposed to the more consultative advice model that is now expected, and I can see it swinging very heavily into that now and into the future.
Farms, when I think of farms and farmers, are we talking, to Kylie's point, about family units, maybe extended family units, or is it a much more kind of corporatized, massive, large-scale farming that, for example, you look after?
Yeah, look, the landscape's changing, which is having an impact on the regional communities. Aggregation is happening, and whether that's because you do have corporates, who are diversifying throughout, say, the Australian wheat belt, or whether it's because you've got a family farm, to one of Kylie's points there, if it's a third or fourth generation, there's very strong chance they're in a position to grow their enterprise. And so family business is becoming more corporate as that aggregation occurs. So look, that landscape is changing. The scale is becoming fairly significant. And again, being very good risk managers, farmers are working out how to diversify to try to, take the ebbs and flows out to the best they can, they can.
And your role as broker, when you're sitting around either the boardroom table or the kitchen table or the farm table, much more strategic and consultative. Is that kind of the direction of travel?
Yeah, so I think that's what is expected now, is to talk about different levers, different triggers. It's not just always going to be about, an indemnity style conversation where it's like, you had an asset, you insured the asset, we'll do our best to replace that asset. We have to be talking about what they're doing to manage their risk, what they're doing to proactively, I guess, mitigate losses, because that's, if they're investing well in their business, they're, by virtue of doing that, they're going to be mitigating losses, which, the insurers, like Allianz, when you pitch that to them correctly, they see the saving, and they should see the saving if they're investing and they're managing their risk better. So in that way, it's more consultative. It's not just, there's your asset, here's a premium. It should be more engagement, and the better operators are absolutely getting rewarded for the investment they make in their risk.
Maybe we'll come back to what that looks like. That I might, Tom, head to you on this question. And I mean, what are you obviously running a very large portfolio right across the country. Well, what are the themes and the trends you're seeing and how they've evolved over time?
Yeah, I mean, Caleb touched on quite a lot there in terms of, the aggregation piece coming across. I think we're seeing more larger farms and, the risks that are associated with that. A push from brokers, particularly around, tailoring solutions for those customers. And from an insurer perspective, it's about how can we better support those types of clients. I think there's a lot of change in terms of technology. And, I think I made the comment to someone the other day where, when I kind of started out, if you had talked about virtual fencing being a thing, you would have gone, oh, that's something out of the movies, whereas that's here now. And that's just one example. There's so many different types of tech out there now. So again, from an insurer perspective, how do we try and keep up? Would be the key thing, right? Farmers are very quick at adapting this tech, and we need to try and find solutions for them into the future. So I think there's a real pace in terms of the change that's coming. That creates complexity, but also opportunities. So plenty kind of happening and to be excited about.
Yeah. Hey, can you just maybe pick up that theme on tech? I mean, give us some examples. What kind of tech and how farms are adapting to use it?
Oh, look, I think, and look, brokers who are out on farms will know this better than I will, but, I just use really simple examples, of a farmer showing me an app that's monitoring his water levels, for example, right? And he knows that instantly. So there's a hole in that tank, he knows straight away, rather than finding it a week later when it's already empty. Requests for headers now are $2 million. So we're talking about some really advanced tech, which is driving better outcomes on farm. And it's different for everyone, right? The water app example might be for a small hobby farmer, whereas the header example is kind of heading to that corporate farm, and then there's everything in between. So, like I said, that creates challenges because as an insurer, you're getting thrown stuff that you've never even seen before or thought about. But equally, we need to come up with solutions for those customers as well.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, I'm going to come to tech and stuff on farm to Caleb and Kylie. But Kylie, if hopefully your sound's okay, I'll just go back to you on that. What have you seen change over the last, during your lifetime in terms of risks on farm?
Yeah, we've actually found that a lot of the smaller farmers have sold out. Is that working? Yep, that's right. We've sold out their farms, and the bigger farmers just buying them out. So what used to be a big farm at 2,000 acres now is 20,000 acres. So a lot of the small farms have actually more or less left. So, and the bigger farmers, as Tom said, the equipment is huge. The hay storage is huge. We've just found that, the ones that have had a real dip into it, they've gotten bigger and bigger. So and you're more or less on the phone with them every day. So every day there's a challenge that they've, whether it's workers or hay, sheep, anything, you're on the phone talking to the farmer daily, whereas it used to be probably 2 or 3 times a year. So.
Yeah, Kylie, earlier we were talking about this consolidation, so family farms and passed on to their kids and the eldest kid and so on, versus selling and kids choosing not to stay on the land. Can you just unpack that a bit further for us?
Yeah, so that's the next sort of challenges with a lot of the farmers are facing. So if you have 2 or 3 sons, one might go to Melbourne and work in a corporate job, the other 2 might stay. Then it divides the farm a little bit. It's who actually receives the farm. And I spoke to a farmer not long ago, and they said no one really cared about the land until the prices went through the roof. Now it's become it's dividing families. There's a lot of succession planning with accountants, and lawyers. Yeah, depending on, one son might marry someone from the city, and they don't want to go to remote areas, so it becomes very tricky. So a lot of the time, it's just trying to work out who stays on the farm, who receives the land in their name, and it does destroy a lot of families as well.
Up to that in a moment. Sorry, Caleb, you go.
It's just Kylie's touched on a really important point there that I think is actually moving the progression and the rate, and that is that with that diversification, you've got 2 or 3 people that might have gone off farm, got a different education, whether they're studying ag or they're law or they're accountants. They're then working, could be in the banking sector, could be in another area, and then potentially coming back with that outside sort of commercial knowledge that's not exclusively farm practice. However, they grew up in the farm space, and now all of a sudden the progression and the decisions they make in that business are completely different. So I think that's a really valid point, and it does mean that succession on farm is really a critical, especially when you're talking multi-generational farms, which Kylie be seeing every other day.
That impacts the risk, right? And the advice that you folks would provide. Maybe Caleb, and then to you, Kylie, how does that manifest when you kind of see a farm, wrestling with the generational succession issues?
Yeah, well, it's from my experience with that, it's something I believe you need to tackle early with the client to understand where they want to take the business. I think, again, where historically we think on an indemnity basis, which we do a thing and then we wait for it to I guess, to fix the past, whatever's happened. Whereas when you're in this space, you need to be thinking forward about where is the business going? Are they planning to acquire? Are they planning to grow? Are they planning to diversify? Because sometimes it might be they've got a stronghold at the Mallee, to Kylie's sort of area, but then they've bought something now in the northern rivers to try to sort of diversify their risk, to give them exposure, new opportunities, and in some ways a bit of a balance sheet sort of mitigation, if you like. So they're the sort of conversations we need to be having with the growers, because they're already there. We historically, as an industry, just haven't really serviced that appropriately.
Yeah. Harley?
Yeah. I've also found that a lot of the farmers, so the sons are looking into the new, what's available, but the fathers who've run the farm for the last 50 years don't want to change. They don't like change. So then you've got the sons trying to diversify the farm, but the father actually not agreeing with them. So,
And Tom, how does, from your point of view as an insurer, how does that? I mean, I guess you see this all the time, right? How do you folks think about reconciling or managing the generational stuff that rolls in? I imagine on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think we see it probably slightly differently to how the broker sees it. I think if we look at it from an industry perspective, what you see is fewer farms, but a higher percentage of larger farms. So, like I kind of mentioned before, it's, well, those farms need something slightly different to your smaller farm, right? And we'll have brokers kind of asking for higher limits than we might ordinarily do, or a slightly different wording. So to Caleb's point, it's about how that risk is presented to us. Does the risk management stack up moving forward? But certainly from our perspective, it's you're seeing more farms that are slightly larger.
Right. Hey, can I just jump back into, and perhaps Kylie, to you first, and then to Caleb, just on this tech, the use of tech, from drones to measuring things to apps. Well, what are some of the things that you're seeing, and how's that actually helping farms manage the risk better? Kylie?
Yeah, so recently we've started to cover a lot of precision ag spraying units, which they're attached to their big boom sprays, and they just only hit the actual weed itself. So they're not spraying the whole land. It's just saving costs on sprays and chemicals. They've started with the new autonomy sprayers, where they're not even actually in the farmer itself. It's not even using it. It's done by AI. Automatic sheep feeders, drones. Yeah, we're seeing it quite a lot now. Yeah.
Does it start on the big, I imagine it's reasonably high investment. Does it start on the big farms and cascade down, or is it the innovative smaller farms that are checking it out?
No, the smaller farms aren't there. The prices of things, I think, the smaller farms can't probably get to that level. The bigger farms they've got huge equipment that things can attach to. So they've got bigger farms to do. So they need more to be able to, instead of having staff, they've actually got AI-driven machinery.
Yeah. Kylie, we were talking in our rehearse about haystacks, what are some of the big risks, and haystacks going up, and that there's some really good tech, preventative tech. Can you maybe just tell that story?
So we've got a few farmers that have their sheds, their hay sheds. So you've got anywhere between $400,000 to $600,000 worth of hay in a shed. They've now got new machines that they heat temperatures. So the minute that the shed heats up, their phones will set alarms, so they can get there and move the stacks around to prevent any fires starting. That seems to be a thing that a lot of the farmers are using now.
Fantastic. And Tom, I imagine, those mitigating tools definitely impact your assessment of the risk, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what they do is take largely the human element out of it, right? Where 5 years ago it was a manual check, and we relied on stacks being spread and a lot of human elements. Now you can get that through an app, and it goes beep 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 as soon as the temperature or moisture goes up. Like that's great outcome for everyone, right? So I think the more we see this develop, and Kylie mentioned the cost there. The cost can sometimes be prohibitive, but as that tech price comes down and farmers start to see that more and more in their area and the benefits that can bring, I think it's fantastic.
Fantastic. Folks, just a shout out. Thank you, Stacey. Questions, please feel free to ask. I'll go to questions in just a moment. But Caleb, just to you on tech take up, are there any amazing things you've seen in your travels?
Yeah, plenty of amazing things. I think we've just touched on a couple. With those balers, we're just talking about hay. Most of those, the manufacturers of those products now, they've got temperature controls that'll identify a hot bale and hit it with a lick of spray paint on the way out. So when it comes to being stacked, there's a red line or something on that bale to signify don't put that with the rest of them because it's picked up higher protein or higher sugar, which makes it more volatile to spontaneous combustion. And similar. It's similar in the cotton game. So your cotton modules have similar tech, where it'll actually be flagged that it came out, a little bit too hot and there's a higher risk. So I guess that's how the ag tech is starting to influence that area pretty significantly, and in turn that'll obviously help Tom's rates with Allianz. Because we're going to be able to prevent the size of the losses, mitigate some of the, so instead of losing $1 million worth of hay, maybe you only lose, a few bales. I think that the more interesting thing that I've been engaging with is what they're actually doing with the data. So we talk about the tech, but really it's the data that is helping them manage the decisions on farm now. And everyone's across that, whether it's their apps or, the AI. Kylie's point with the spray rigs, those swarm bots, they're completely mapped. And they also know when the wind gets to a certain point, the machine will just shut down because it's not safe to spray a chemical, So you got all that automation going on, and that can all be tracked, so you can see exactly what it's delivered. If you talk about the sheep game, they're now you'll see a lot of growers now starting to create a feedlot concept. And the reason they're doing that is by, instead of letting your sheep wander around 3,000 or 20,000 acres and it's eating, but it's basically working off what it's eating, they now put them in 5,000 sheep in a feedlot where they can control its diet, control its water, control how much it exercises. So instead of growing at sort of 50 grams a day, it might be growing at 300 grams a day. All right. So all of a sudden now we can keep up, at a much, a better product, and they're going to turn that product over quicker, that's what, the Australian and global population demands. So they're just some really sophisticated things that they are measuring down to that level of what each sheep can do in grams per day based on, their favorite recipe they like feeding them.
Two questions come from that, Caleb, and I might throw it to all of you. Obviously, first one is the skill set that you need to be a successful farmer on the one hand. And then on the other hand, the notion of, if you go back in Australian history and, the shearer's shed and, there were a bunch of people wandering the outback doing a whole bunch of jobs. Well, if tech, AI and apps are doing a lot of the jobs, what does that speak to in terms of, people living in regions, people working on farms and so on? Caleb, maybe start with you on that, and then Kylie to you and then to Tom. And then I'll go to questions, folks.
Yeah, look, my view on that is I think the tech is happening as a result of the aggregation that came before it. So I think the automation has to happen because there's not a labour force in regional communities as there once was. Obviously, COVID had an impact on that because, you missed 2 million backpackers coming in doing seasonal style work. So that was the start of us realising that, we didn't have enough people who knew how to work in Australia anymore. So now we've got this challenge, and they're using automation to do some things. It's still going to be a challenge for really bespoke functions like shearing. I'm sure Colin can probably go on that, but there's certain functions that you still need a skilled human element. Look, I think the tech and the automation's happening because there's just not enough people living in the regional sort of areas anymore.
Thanks, Caleb. I've got some great questions coming through here. Absolutely awesome. Can't wait to get to them. Sorry, Kylie, over to you and then to Tom.
No, that's fine. I agree with Caleb. Shearing's probably one thing that I don't see how they'll be able to manage with tech. But as far as I spoke to a farmer the other day, and he said it'll come to a time where they won't even hop in their tractor anymore. It'll actually run by GPS units and AI. So, and it is an issue with the having staff or people work on the farms. So, younger people, where are they going to go if that's what they want to do? So, I think there'll be a few issues going forward.
Fantastic. And Tom?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And the one thing I'd probably add is that I think, into the future, there's a real opportunity to uplift safety for employees and farm workers through technology. And that's been that's been ever present for as long as farming's been around. It's always been a high risk, dangerous industry. So I think, as that tech continues to evolve, yes, it'll need some skilled labour, but it'll also bring with it some safety benefits, which is a great outcome for the industry.
Yeah. So, Tom, question here from Cherry. For Tom, where a client is investing in AI, ag tech, such as risk mitigation on hay baling, for example, is there a change in the appetite on risk, change in rates from an underwriting perspective? I imagine lower premiums, etc.
Yeah, look, I mean, every hay risk is different, right? So broadly speaking, I think the answer is yes. Whenever a risk is presented, risk management is looked at, and if they've got some brand new tech which is going to protect that hay and is proven to do that, then that's going to help us underwrite that risk and maybe offer cover where we wouldn't have, maybe offer it at a cheaper rate than we ordinarily would have, maybe reduce an excess that might have been higher. So all those kind of variables come into play, but I think absolutely where risk management can be shown to be effective, and whether that's through tech or other ways, absolutely, we're seeing that today in terms of our underwriting.
Yeah, and just a follow-up, more a comment, given your answer from Karina. When do you feel the premium relief will show on premiums for farms embracing tech?
Yeah, look, in extension of the answer, right? I think it's today. I think where it's proven to be effective, it's no different to any other risk kind of question we'd ask through a system, or any insurer would ask it against any product, right? So where that can be presented to us and reviewed, or generally speaking, I think there's benefit there today.
I think awesome. as the broker in that as well, part of our job is, and the insurers can't always do this, but we need to understand that every type of crop that is going to be baled has a different volatility to spontaneous combustion. Certain crops just really don't have it when they're baled, put into a hay bale. Others have really high sugar component that stays in the plant, which means it's going to be, have a really high chance of going up in flames. So I think, again, the way you mitigate that risk, you need to understand it, pitch it to Allianz, and, because they just look at hay. They don't necessarily understand there could be 7 different types of plant that could be turned into a hay bale. So I think if we can go that extra mile, you definitely get the reward from the insurers.
And Caleb, are you seeing those negotiations take place where you're talk to your data point, really, really smart data-led discussion so that you can influence the type of cover, the type of price, and so on?
Yeah, I haven't seen insurers yet go to that level of detail. And when insurers don't do it, in the absence of that, I try to do it, I guess. And that's to, again, promote the risk and articulate what that client's doing differently to get a better outcome for the client. Because, again, the insurers, look at it as, hey, they don't necessarily go down into that sort of detail as to, which type of plant is it, and therefore is it more likely to combust than like a stubble bale or a straw bale or a oaten versus wheat, etc.
Gotcha. Hey, really interesting observation here from Stacey. Perhaps Kylie, you may want to comment, but succession planning is obviously fathers and sons, but it's mothers and daughters. Lots of fantastic women running farms, innovating on farms across Australia. Any comments you'd like to add to that, Kylie, Caleb or Tom?
Oh, I see a lot of women on the farm. There's one of a client of ours that so they've got a dry land farm plus they've got an engineering part to it. But the daughter actually runs the bookwork for both farm, dry land farm, and the engineering. I think there's a lot of places for women, and a lot of women still run the farms after their partner or husband have passed. They're still running. So I I'm sorry if I use the male, the father-son thing, but there are a lot of women out there that run the farms pretty well. So,
Yeah, awesome.
mm,
Thanks, Kylie. Caleb?
Yeah, look, I think it's an area that has changed because of how mechanised farming is now. Once upon a time, it was, just physically, like really physically demanding work, and farmers used to have bad backs, and they were done by the time they were 45. And whether that was the male or female, it was just very physically demanding. What I've seen is and the clients that I've got across, I guess, huge areas of Australia is that it doesn't matter. It's not a male female thing. It's just farming, and now there's just as many women out there doing just as much and are just as capable, if not, on certain areas of the business, they'll be more capable. And the best farms are often when you've got a really good unit, whether it's a husband-wife unit or it could be, brother and sister with their respective families. But, they often end up driving because you've got a mix of, perspectives and skill sets that end up making them a more robust enterprise.
Yeah, awesome. Folks, I'm going to thank you for the questions, folks. Please keep them coming. We're going to go to a poll question. We're at 1:08. We'll finish at 1:30. So the first poll question is really trying to ascertain from the audience a question around emerging risks. Kira, if we can go there. And as the poll question comes up, folks, feel free just to, there you go. In your client conversations, how often does digital or technology risk come up in the context of farm insurance? Regularly, occasionally, rarely, never. Feel free just to tell us what your experience is, and that'll help guide and shape the next bit of the conversation. Just whilst that's coming up, Tom, I might just throw to you. Kylie mentioned AI in farming, and there's a broad conversation about AI in, well, pretty much in everything in life at the moment. I mean, how does Allianz see it in terms of it being an opportunity or a new frontier, or something on the downside? How are you seeing that play out?
Look, I think from an insurer side, it's still early days, but I think the potential upside is massive. I mentioned before there's a safety component here, which is massive. Kylie mentioned some of the precision ag that's being done. Like there's obvious risk reduction there in terms of just the precision that's involved. So plenty of upside. So very exciting, but still very early days in terms of what we're seeing and what that actually in terms of quantifying what that actually looks like.
Yeah, Caleb, are you seeing some of your clients really lean into this and kind of really embrace tech and particularly AI?
I think they've been forced to, and whether you look at it and say it was the machinery manufacturers, or you look at their other consultants like their agronomists, and there's now platforms AgWorld, to name, one of the sort of fairly standard ones now. They use that AI and that tech to basically map their whole farm to decide, make decisions as to their inputs on farm, their fertilizer spend, whether they even need to put fertilizer on, do we put a different crop into rotation? Like, that's all done now through tech, under advice from consultants. But I don't know. I haven't had a meeting in the last couple of years that hasn't had where I haven't learned something about sophisticated tech that farmers are using.
Yeah. Hey, folks. Sorry, Tom. Did you want to jump in on that one?
Oh, no.
Just quickly to the poll answers. In your client conversations, how often does digital or tech risk come up in the context of farm insurance? 30% regularly, 31% occasionally, 32% rarely, and 7% never. Kylie, anything on those numbers of surprise, great surprise?
Yeah, I think with the never, I think especially with the dryland farmers, the Ag World app pretty much with all major farmers now. So, and they're used for everything as far as to submit their crop insurance, everything. So the agronomists use them with the farmers. So I think going forward, I think it's something that we all have to discuss with all farmers, especially as AI is building.
Yeah. Caleb, any further comments to your previous ones?
Just when I see rarely and never there, I think, again, that needs to be driven from us, because clients are used to having a different conversation about insurance. And if it's not coming up at all, as brokers, you need to be driving that conversation, because I can guarantee they're using data that's more sophisticated than what we're asking for on a proposal form.
Yeah. And Tom?
Oh, probably just the flip side of that 60% are having that conversation, right? Like I'm never quite sure, right, from an insurer perspective, sitting on this side of the fence. So I guess kind of encouraging to see that is happening 60% of the time now, and is probably only going to be increasing more and more. So just that lens on that as well.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, just to follow up from you, here's a question from Nicole. Given the increase in, and this is about cyber insurance, given the increasing reliance on tech in modern farming operations, what's your approach in positioning cyber insurance alongside traditional farm cover when dealing with rural clients?
Yeah, really good question, right? And this is the logical next step in this space. So it's there now, right? And I said as an insurer, we're always trying to play catch up. So I think we need to find an answer for the cyber risks on farm, and we need to find it quickly.
Yeah. Hey, just while a great question here from Jara. Caleb, this is for you. In a future where farms are scaling, adopting AI and becoming more sophisticated, how do we ensure social license keeps pace with innovation, and what role can insurance play in supporting that? What do you reckon, Caleb?
Social license. I mean, I can talk to the insurance piece. Look, I think I just think where we're going to have battles is going to be, you've got the manufacturers and all the on-farm data. So if you look at John Deere, for example, they completely can run all of their gear off one GPS unit on a farm. Now, I think that creates a bit of a risk from a point of view that whole farming enterprise could shut down if there's a breach on the John Deere end. So there are risks with that. Was the other part? So was it a social impact, Richard?
It was kind of social license.
Social license. Look, I think everyone now in the farming sector, and I think Kylie made the point earlier, is that when everyone realised there's money in the land that they were farming, everyone now understands what they need to do to make the the production of that land, whichever facet you look at, to be the most sustainable it can be. I think that's where the data's coming in. I think that's where they're making decisions led by data insights, and that's rotating right crops, not using too much fertilizer just because that's what my dad used to do 20 years ago. And as a result of that, they're coming up with more sustainable, more cost-effective ways to produce crop that's sort of better for the environment, which in turn generally means your output or the produce, whether it's chooks, beef, sheep, plants, you're getting a healthier, better outcome. So hopefully that touches a little bit on that.
Yeah, I got an absolutely cracker of a question. Thank you, Stacey. Tom, this is for you. As we see more solar and wind farm developments going in next to agricultural land, and what liability exposures are you seeing emerge from farming operations? I'm thinking about things like fire risk, electrical infrastructure, access disputes, environmental impacts. And just on a personal note, a mate of mine's got a hobby farm out the back of Crookwell in New South Wales, and driving out there, giant wind farms. And we were sitting over dinner, and his neighbour came over, and the economics are absolutely compelling, which I, being a city slicker, had no context of or understanding of. So Tom, maybe your piece on that, given net zero and alternative energy is a fairly big debate, given the issues around the Straits of Hormuz, amongst other things.
Yeah, great question. I think it's an industry challenge that we need to look at. I think there's absolutely exposures there. I think it's kind of been well documented in the news, that farmers are concerned about, what if they, start a fire on their property and they burn out the energy infrastructure, for example. So I think there's a role for insurers, government, NIBA to play in terms of coming to the table and going, well, what does this look like? Who's responsible? And ultimately, to your point, Richard, if there's going to be more and more of this stuff into the future, let's get some certainty around, what are the limits and who pays for this stuff? Because it's been well documented there that there's some exposures, and being really clear on where the liability lies and what the limit to that liability is really important to give some certainty to farmers and landholders.
Yeah, that's probably a topic all on its own. I'm just going to move us on, folks, to 118. Two topics I wanted to close out on. One, of course, is what is weather and when will it rain or when won't it rain? And the other question, of course, is mental health, well-being and resilience on farm. But maybe first to the weather. So Caleb, Kylie, maybe unpack for us, heading down the corner store at the country town, I'm imagining weather, likely where the past weather is going to be a big issue. Why is it such a big issue? And maybe unpack that a bit for us.
Yeah, for your smaller communities, your farmers are the main businesses around that area. And if they're not doing well, no business in those small communities will go well. So everyone talks about the weather. It's up or down and around the Mallee. They've actually had a good rain. They need more rain now. So a lot of them have already started cropping. So now they just need the follow-up rains and so on to get through the year. I think that's their main topic of conversation because their whole livelihood revolves around the weather. So, yeah.
And from your point of view?
Yeah, I like to use a simple analogy when I talk to people who aren't, connected to this as Kylie and Tom and we are, but it's as simple as this. If you have a shop, your favorite shop your favorite cafe that you go to, and they just decide to shut the door for the year because they have no cash flow, there's no inputs, there's nothing they can produce to turn around and give you. That's how simple it is. It just means you just have to learn to trade for another year with no money. And that's why the weather, although we always joke about it, and it's always, a bit of a cliche thing, but it's just that simple. If it doesn't rain at the right times, it just may mean that you miss the window to have any form of production and therefore any form of cash flow for your business. And I think, getting on my soapbox for a moment, we need to do more in this space to create sort of cash flow style, or at least cash flow stops to ensure that I guess they can manage their debt, they can continue to grow and continue to invest in the capital they need to be productive for not just the Australian population, but the global population, because we've got a big role to play in that as Australia with, our production.
Is tech getting better? Predictive tech and so on? I mean, it might not make it rain, but might be a bit more accurate about when and how high the temps are or low and whatever.
I think it depends which channel you look at. I think everyone's got a different method of recording that. I think the insurers got different methods of recording that. I think we're still all very reactive to it. And I just think it's impossible to get the sack if you're a weatherman or woman.
Yeah. Okay. Kylie or Tom, anything to add on rain and weather and predictive, the value of the bureaus, whoever they are?
Maybe only that, the recent fuel crisis has probably just highlighted Caleb's point about cafes, right, and food and how important it is. I think a lot of my mates aren't from the country, and because fuel has been so topical lately, it's forced this conversation on, well, why is fuel so important and what are the flow-on impacts and what does that mean from a day-to-day perspective, right? And then all of a sudden they're connecting, well, that's why the weather is so important and that's why all these other things that impact farmers and why farmers themselves are so important. So I think it's been interesting just to see some of that click over in people's minds that I've been speaking to who aren't necessarily connected to agri in the same way that we are on this panel.
Yeah. It's a bit of a clarion call, isn't it? Hey, Kylie, I'm going to start with you for the last topic, which is we spoke a little earlier in our rehearse about, being on the land, mental health issues, resilience issues. To maybe take us through some of the examples that we were talking about earlier, like how does that manifest? How do people cope? Who do people reach out to and so on?
Yeah, a lot of with the AI going forward, the staff won't be as many as they normally have, or the ones coming overseas. So a lot of the farmers that we have so from Norway or Poland or something come over and do a bit of training. That hasn't been as big lately or since COVID really, but I think the remoteness of the farmer. Sometimes the farmer might not see anyone for a week, so. I don't think it's great mental health wise, and especially the more AI we're getting, the less farm hands you'll have. So I just think that plus succession planning, there's a lot of like the fuel, there's so many headaches for the farmer. So the support, any way you can support a farmer, I think is great with the challenges that they have every day.
Yeah, and is this do you see this writ large? Is this a problem that you see every week, every day, or is it kind of weather dependent or?
No. Yeah, very weather dependent. So there was quite a bad down in around South Victoria, which wasn't great for the farmers. Obviously, there was a lot of depression down that area, so it wasn't a great year last year for them. So won't go into that, but yeah, very horrible time for them.
Yeah. Caleb, your take on this? You see a lot of farms and farmers. How does mental health and resilience play out when there's so many variables?
Yeah, look, farmers are stoic, but they're also, I guess, the most isolated, contributors to our economy. And especially if you look at it now with the aggregation, actually comes greater isolation, because instead of having 10 farmers in a 20,000 acre plot, as say for example over in India, they still average like 1.5 acres a person or a family farm, whereas here we're talking 20, 30, 50, hundreds of thousands of acres controlled by one family. But, that was once made up by multiple families. So the isolation is getting more significant. The connection into then the regional community as a result of that, because you've only got, say, one family servicing an area, that just means that by virtue of that, those little small towns are struggling. So it puts pressure on the small business in the small town as much as it puts, stress onto the growers themselves, especially when all of a sudden there's no cash flow, or the outlook is we're not going to have any cash flow. So it's always been a big issue. It'll continue being an issue, and I just think there's various things we can do to help. And in my personal case, I try to support charities who I know that are supporting rural and regional health initiatives, and that's because I know I can't do it myself, but we want to get behind businesses that are doing that, who are on the ground, who are providing those resources where there's none currently, and or very little spent on regional health resourcing.
Yeah. Tom, how do you see this issue play out?
Oh, look, I agree with everything that's just said. I think, Kylie mentioned at the start around, speaking with clients daily and that daily connection. So brokers obviously play a key role in that connection. Caleb talking about charities and, how do we, as an industry partner, better with some of those support networks? Even at a simple insurer level, like how do we provide better products and systems which allow brokers to spend less time dealing with us and more time with customers? I think all these things are really important, and how do we double down on them?
Yeah. Folks, it's 1:27. I'm going to close the conversation with the following. One, to the panel, absolutely amazing. For the 300 plus people online, please feel free to use emojis to give them a virtual thank you. Really awesome insight from across the team. To the people who asked the questions, thank you for engaging. There were a couple that we didn't get to. So apologies for that, but we'll try and grab them offline. We have recorded today, so this will be available to watch again if you wish to. And of course, in the next NIBA magazine, look out for the actual long form broker guide called Farming the Future, which picks up a lot of the discussion that we've had today. Big thanks, Tom, to you, to Jade, to Julie, and to Ben, and to the Allianz team for supporting this. I think the turn up demonstrates the real interest. And, if you're working in the bush, you're familiar, but if you're working in the city, maybe you don't get to see and hear about these topics. So super, super valuable. And so super big thank you. Very quick slide share on 2 upcoming NIBA activities. The first one is our Gala Lunch series. This is through July. Obviously, broker time is huge in June. The Gala Lunches will roll across the country. We'll acknowledge the winners of the Young Broker per state and the Broker of the Year. So really looking forward to that. Some charity fundraising, bit of a nice downtime. We're selling out pretty fast. Victoria's all but sold. So guys, if you want to come along, please jump in sooner rather than later to avoid disappointment. And of course, the big showcase event for NIBA community is coming up at Royal Pines on the 18th to 20th of October. Well in planning for that, and some fantastic response from around the market. Lots of learning, lots of connecting, lots of networking, and lots of celebrating. Big thanks to you guys on the panel. Big thanks to Allianz. Big thanks to the audience for joining and staying. And we'll see you on the next webinar. And if you've got any great ideas for another webinar, just drop us a line. We're always keen to hear topics that will resonate in the market. For now, have a great afternoon. Cheers.